TopMedTalk.
And welcome to TopMedTalk. We are here in Singapore for the 18th World Congress of Anesthesiologists. I'm Desiree Chappell. I'm your host. I'm joined by my former co-editor-in-chief and former editor-in-chief of TopMedTalk, Monty Mythen. Hello, Monty.
Good morning, Desiree. Everyone knows I have joined Edwards Life Sciences as an employee as of August last year, but TopMedTalk has very graciously allowed me to get back on the cans occasionally, with full disclosure about my relationship with Edwards. But Edwards are also our original founding sponsor.
Yes.
So the links are strong, but
Yes.
I am not here to talk about Edwards products.
Yes. In fact, we're here to talk to a friend of the TopMedTalk family, Dr. Andy Shaw. Hello.
Good morning, Desiree. Good morning, Monty. It's
Morning,
lovely
Andy.
to be back on the TopMedTalk sofa.
That's right. Yep. On the couch, hanging out. So, Andy, very busy meeting over here in Singapore. So, first of all, you flew in. How was it adjusting to being on a complete opposite?
It's, the 13-hour time difference is tricky. Fortunately, I have an analog watch, so I only had to move the
1 hour.
1 hour. But from day to night, it's tricky, and it's almost a week now, and I'm still only just getting used to it.
Yeah.
The meeting is incredible. Everybody who's been here is having an amazing time. Something like 5,000 colleagues from around the world. And, you know, I think a lot of people, until you come to a meeting like this, you don't really appreciate what a true melting pot global anesthesia and perioperative care actually truly is.
Over 100 countries.
140.
140, yeah.
140
Yeah.
countries. Because we had our lunchtime session yesterday, did the sort of where are you from?
Mm-hmm.
And it was very different to usual.
I spend most of my time in American meetings these days, or some European ones, but this is a different level of awesome.
It really
fantastic.
is. Yeah. And just the people, I don't know about you guys, but for me, the people I'm meeting are just absolutely incredible.
Yeah.
Like, they are fascinating. The work that they're doing, they're the only pediatric anesthesiologists in their country. They may be doing this fascinating work in the war zone.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's pretty cool stuff.
It's very humbling. It's very inspiring. And every time I talk to someone here, I learn something new. And that's the reason to keep coming. It's a long way from home, but boy, is it good value.
So it's been every 4 years, but we missed the last one 8 years ago.
Right.
Was the last one in person, but they're going to every 2 years now.
Well, I believe so. I'm not involved in the World Federation, but I understand, and maybe, Monty, you have a better handle on this, but I believe they're going to a 2-year model with a slightly smaller, perhaps, less globally expensive, I suppose.
Yeah, that is.
Every 2 years, and then the 4-year one will continue. I think the next 4-year one's in Vancouver.
And the one in between, I think, is in Marrakesh.
Marrakesh, yeah.
Yeah.
So I think that's a good example of, somewhere slightly off the beaten track, which hopefully people will be interested to go attend. And, I don't know how many people have been to Marrakesh before. I certainly haven't, so I'll be going.
So if I say Marrakesh Express, does that resonate with you, Andy?
Yeah.
Desiree, does that mean anything to you?
It's a movie?
Oh,
Wait, no, it's a thought.
As in riding on.
exactly. And put that towards
The
the
train. Yeah.
Credit me with it, Nick. That would be great.
Yeah, but I think, to get back to the point, the 2-year frequency allows, more of this amazing international collaboration. It's very inspiring. It's one of the reasons to come to work in the morning, and it's one of the reasons to justify flying so far away.
It is. And the networking, like work last night at the dinner,
Yeah.
Paul Miles, all these people are going to Paul Miles from all over the world. And then you're talking
with good reason.
Right.
Full miles.
Oh,
Right?
well, I know, but I mean, just those, and all these people we're meeting that are involved in these big, networking trials. It's super cool.
But it's not just about the mega names like Paul. It's about, people trying to do the best for their patients in whatever their local environment is, be it high resourced, low resourced, medium resourced, or what.
Yeah.
We're looking across at the posters. I mean, there's this whole long strip of poster presentations on screens, and there's people around them wearing headphones listening to...
Both of you guys have done the poster sessions.
Absolutely.
It's good stuff.
It's amazing. I think there were more than 1,000 submitted and accepted and therefore presented abstracts here, all up on screen, so people haven't had to carry a big poster from home. It is amazing. And predominantly young, early to mid-career folks, which is just incredibly inspiring.
Yeah, it really is. Well, cool. Well, Andy, so you've done some poster sessions, presentations over the week. Anything that you've enjoyed?
All of it, really. I try to go to stuff that's not in my immediate content space. So I go to obstetrics, pediatrics, because that's not my practice, because it's good to see what's going on in those other fields. As usual, the regional anesthesia crowd are leading the way with technology and seem to be able to image smaller and smaller nerves and block more and more specific parts of the of the nervous system. So that's always inspiring. And in my space, in cardiac surgery and intensive care, there's a lot more interest now in regional anesthesia because of the importance of fast track or enhanced recovery type protocol.
Are you doing much at your place?
Yeah, we do. Either in the operating room or in the intensive care unit, depending on, I have to say, if I'm honest, it depends on the urgency of the to follow case to get done and the enthusiasm of the providers. But we do a lot of pectoral intercostal fascial plane blocks.
Run that one by me again slowly.
PIF blocks. Okay. It's basically an intercostal block either side of the sternum.
Gotcha.
But we find that's very, even I can do it.
Yeah,
that's how I know it's easy to do and reparable. So
the professor
do. Yeah, exactly. And it's very effective. Means people wake up comfortably, get extubated quickly, and so we like it a lot. We're big fans.
It's good stuff.
Andy, well, you mentioned that global access to cardiac surgery, because certainly when I started off, before you started off, there was a lot of the world that did not have access to cardiac surgery.
And I think that's still, unfortunately, the case. There is, however, definite progress. I think, in fact, and we can talk about this later on, we're just about to start a new organisation to speak to this a little bit, following our surgeon's lead from a few years ago. But in terms of access to corrective heart surgery, the diseases in the developing world, of course, are not the same as those in the developed world. And therefore, the need for different technology, the need for different therapeutic solutions is being driven now largely from the emerging economies, if you will. And I think that's very interesting. The need for educational interchange, collaboration, research opportunities has never been greater. But for the first time, at least in my experience, the drag for that collaboration is coming from both sides of the discussion, from the high-income world and the low to middle-income world. I remember vividly as a registrar going to India, ostensibly to quote-unquote teach people how to do echocardiography, and asking the surgeon at the time why he was repairing a mitral valve which was very heavily calcified. In the West, we wouldn't have dreamt of repairing it. And he looked at me and he said, 1, our patients can't afford valves. 2, even if they could, we can't afford to anticoagulate them.
Yes.
So, and he looked at me, he said, so, necessity is the mother of invention. We have learned to repair these valves. And I thought it was a real aha moment. It's a real personal illustration of the need to learn from people who don't have what we perceive are all the bells and whistles, but in actual fact may not be. That's just an example, but it extends throughout the whole cardiac space.
Yeah. We talked about this during the technology session. It's that we shouldn't be pushing on technology that may or may not be useful, or that a lower to middle income country can't even use, thinking it's going to be the solution to whatever their problem is. It needs to go the other way.
But interestingly, I think one example, if you look at transcatheter valve technology, in the aortic position, predominantly rheumatic disease doesn't cause stenotic disease, it causes regurgitant disease. But the developed world transcatheter valve solutions have been developed largely for stenotic disease with a calcified annulus that you can land a prosthesis in. That doesn't work so well in the developed world, in the emerging world. However, the technology to deploy the device does. And I think that's an example of something that will play forwards as the lower middle income companies develop solutions which are locally deployable.
So, and the other thing, we were talking to Kevin Fong yesterday, partly about AI and the future of AI. And earlier in the day, you'll tell us about it in a second, Andy, we were in another meeting where one of the slides went up and said, although there isn't equal access to medical care in the world, there's remarkable increasing equity of access to smartphones and digital signals. And there is a discussion that some things will leapfrog the mechanical solution to the digital solution to enable healthcare.
Well, that's true, of course, is the world, and his wife now has
not going to fix the smartphone.
But until there's sufficient bandwidth, all the smartphones in the world, if they can't get online, they can't be helped.
No.
But I think you're right. I think we will see an entire leapfrogging of what the assumption is that technology developed in the high-income world then gets manufactured at scale, the price comes down, and now the rest of the world can afford it. I think that paradigm is changing almost by the day.
And I think we've seen some examples of that. If we take the current electronic health record in many of our worlds, once you're a patient, you get access to it. If you were starting all over again today, you just let us own it and have access to it like a bank account and give permission to get into it. Well, much of the world has jumped straight to that place.
A friend of mine has a startup to do exactly that in India. And the clever part of his technology is that he has a an algorithm that can read doctors' handwriting.
Oh my!
And so
I would buy that.
yeah. So the way it works is the local doctor still writes by hand the medical note. The patient on their smartphone scans the record, which reads the writing and scans it to the appropriate field. So exactly what you were just saying, and that's a really good example of bypassing the decades and gazillions of dollars that have been spent to get us to, what in the West, if you will, or the developed world think is the be-all and end-all, which clearly sometimes it is, but sometimes it isn't.
Yeah. Well, Andy, but let's set the stage because we're here in Singapore today for another POQI. So Perioperative Quality Initiative.
Yes, let's talk about that. And thank you for the opportunity to do so, because it's a group, an entity, a project that's very, very dear to my heart. So I think... How long ago, Monty? 8 years ago now? Where are we, 24? Yes, about 8 years ago.
Before COVID.
BC.
Yeah, BC, exactly. About 8 years BC. Monty and I had the idea, inspired by a similar organisation who worked in the kidney space, that there is ADQI, the Acute Dialysis or Acute Disease Quality Initiative. There's a possibility to do some helpful work in the practice advisory space for busy clinicians who want to know what the quote-unquote right thing to do is, but don't have either the time or the inclination to plow through an ever-expanding literature base to try and summarize what the right thing to do.
Distill down and figure out how to...
And so we formed a not-for-profit organization called the Perioperative Quality Initiative, which we refer to colloquially as POQI.
Yes.
And over the last 8 years, we finished the most recent only yesterday, and now 15 such meetings. And the general theme is we identify a clinical area which we think might be helpful to work in, find generally acknowledged content experts, sometimes we know them, sometimes not, assemble them in the same place physically for a couple of days, and then, generate via what we used to call a modified Delphi approach, sort of iterative backwards and forwards process of discussing the literature, developing questions that then lead to statements that then lead to recommendations, and then debating and refining those, wordsmithing them so that they provide a summary of the content space, but in a practically accessible format. And then there's a voting process, and then we write a paper or two. And so far we've written, I think, about 30 or so papers, all of whom are peer-reviewed, all of which are available open access on the POQI website, which is thepoqi.org.
And that's kind of non-negotiable, right, for the work?
So that's part of the process. And all of the infographic material is also available free of charge to anybody. They don't have to be, quote-unquote, member of POQI. Anybody can go to our website and access the material. And it's been phenomenally popular. We get a lot of feedback about how useful it is. The work has been cited very heavily. 2 examples of that. We did a blood pressure POQI in London a few years ago. That became one of the most highly downloaded articles in the BJA that year. And then again, more recently, with the Enhanced Recovery After Cardiac Surgery group, we wrote a couple of papers, one of which was on pain management and opioids. Yeah. And that became the most read paper in JTCVS, which is where we published it, 22-23. So it seems to be helpful. We enjoy doing it, and it seems to be beneficial for clinicians. And so yesterday, to come right up to date, was POQI 15, and that was the third in a 4-part series looking not at clinical material, but at health economics, the business, the value proposition of perioperative medicine.
Yeah.
And so you referred earlier on to Dingle in Ireland, and that was where we had our first in this series. Yeah. And I can't remember if that was 12, it must have been 12, POQI 12, to look at a sort of an introductory discussion about concepts, about metrics, about general ideas, about thinking about health economics in the perioperative context, and particularly articulating what we believe is the value proposition in its broadest sense.
And it was a very different format than a traditional...
much more of a round table. Yeah. And it's time for these 4. We have invited our sponsors to take part in the discussion. Now, normally, for a clinical content POQI, any organization, and it's now almost in excess of 30 to 35 different entities, both public and private, for-profit, not-for-profit organizations have sponsored us. The funding model is unrestricted educational grant to support POQI. And we use that support to hold these meetings. It's not as transactional as many people assume it is. But this time, because industry has a deliberate and definite stake in what the value proposition for perioperative medicine is, we've invited representatives from our funders to come and join the discussion. And that's been extremely important because it's a perspective that a lot of people who are either providers or perhaps working for payers haven't thought of. So the first meeting in Ireland was to talk about general concepts. The second meeting in Charlotte, just before the end of last year, was to provide a bit of a North American emphasis, but in fact the meeting we set up as organized into groups defined by different perspectives.
Yeah.
So we had a patient perspective group, which I think you might have been involved in. We had a provider group, a payer group, and also a health systems group. The patient group, we actually had a patient advocate join to provide input from, and he was extremely helpful.
Yeah.
So, and this one yesterday was a more of a global perspective based around processes. And all of this stuff will come out at some point in the next 12 to 18 months, depending on when the group chairs get written.
Jump into
Keep looking at me on that.
a snippet of one example there. I was lucky enough to be in the conversation, and thank you very much for that. We talked quite a lot about task shifting, which is a very, very, very hot topic. So what does that mean?
So my understanding of task shifting as opposed to task sharing is where different people are tasked with doing a job than the people who used to do it beforehand.
And the worked example that Professor Mike Grocott started with is that when he, and possibly we, were young doctors in the United Kingdom, our day started by doing the blood rounds. Yeah. So you'd write out lots and lots and lots of forms, possibly the evening before if you were very committed, lots of bottles, and you'd spend hours sometimes.
Try not to mix them up.
Yeah, hours sometimes going around.
I did not know that.
Oh, yeah. As a medical student in particular, that was your job. You got to the ward at, 5 o'clock in the morning, did the morning blood rounds.
And the reason at that stage was because of the nature of the way that young doctors were paid in the United Kingdom.
Gotcha.
We were by far the cheapest per hour members of the team. And that means everyone, everyone, right down to the cleaners, porters, whoever it was. Yeah. We were the hourly rate we received for our 96-hour week was the lowest.
Right.
So at that stage, it made sense for us to spend those hours because there were lots of us, not very many patients, and we were the cheapest. And we weren't very good at it.
Right.
Because we were learning on the job.
Or because we'd mixed the bottle,
You're right.
for example. or I'm being flippant, but, that's
true.
a good example of, because, when you approach a specific task, you want to set your workflow up to optimize as best you can. So if that means getting a load of bottles out and sticking the labels on, because you're in label sticking on mode, or even worse, writing the label, and then you get interrupted, or someone helpfully moves the tray. Anyway, the point is that different people doing different jobs.
Well, the pivot point was that the working week went down and down. European Working Time Directive, it got down to about 48 hours per week, believe it or not. So half the number of hours per week. Same number of doctors, wage goes up a little bit. Now we're very expensive to do a job we're actually bad at.
Not really that great at.
So then we got these teams of phlebotomists who are very task-focused. They don't get as high hourly rate, but more than we used to get as a junior doctor. So they get reasonably well paid, and they're very, very good at what they do because they do one thing.
Right.
Yeah. So that's the task sheet.
Yeah, I think so. There are other examples. People like to use the example of, in some parts of the world, only physicians are allowed to provide anesthesia care. Increasingly, in most parts of the world, I think there's an appreciation that may not be the way to help the most number of people. So other provider types, and really like the word provider, but other anesthesia professionals, for example, are permitted, trained, and encouraged to do the work. And, at our institution, we very much have the policy that we want people practicing at the very top of their license.
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's much less of an emphasis on, you can't do this because you are this type of provider. So it seems in our organization, it seems very natural for different provider types to do different tasks. And there isn't this same protective, turf-based view that there is in some jurisdictions, some parts of the world.
Yes, but we don't, as we move forward, because one of our contributors described it, it's an inevitable component of the history, is that task shifting in all industries has to happen to make the whole thing work. But what we don't want to do is we want to task shift, increase quantity, maintain quality. Ideally, in the phlebotomy example, actually quality went up very significantly.
Absolutely.
And reduce cost, but not reduce the value of the individual performing the
But it
job.
does require people to let go of historically held opinions that may or may not be valid. And that's hard to do, especially if you're one of the types of professional who perceives that your ability to generate a living is being taken away. Absolutely. And so I think having people practice at the top of their training or license is absolutely laudatory. Otherwise, we won't be able to take care of everyone.
Exactly. There was nothing about going to medical school that gave you good handwriting.
No.
So the biggest
Quite the
problem,
opposite.
this is not a flippant comment. My biggest problem, I was actually quite good at finding a vein and quite good at keeping the coloured bottles in the right place. People couldn't read my handwriting. So my problem was that there was nothing about going to medical school that actually made my handwriting worse.
Right.
So somebody can do that much better.
Yeah, I think I'm a big fan of, like I said, getting people, training them, and then having them practice at the top of their license. I genuinely don't understand why. A friend of mine has a saying that people who build tree houses like to pull the rope ladder up behind them, and that's true.
Yeah,
but it's a problem, and so everybody, if we're going to be able to take care of everybody who needs to be taken care of, we have to be a little bit more innovative and a little bit less, I would say, protective of the turf that we work on.
I always think of inclusivity instead of exclusivity and bringing everyone together and raising, rising tides lifts all boats kind of thing. And if we are training each other and we're all learning side by side about the things that we need to do our job and be that professional, then everyone benefits from it. But as long as we're building our walls and trying to keep what we have, it's really tough. And it happens everywhere.
Yeah, it's not just healthcare.
No.
This happens in every industry.
Yeah.
But I think, when I speak to my non-medical friends about this sort of space, they look at me and say, well, you guys need to get over yourself.
Yeah.
Because we don't care. I want the person doing my procedure to be the person that's the best at it.
Yes.
I don't care if it's this flavor of provider or that care type of professional.
Yeah.
I want them to be very good at it.
We had this analogy yesterday. Pilots train for a shorter period of time now to fly the big jets.
Right.
And I don't know, but there's a possibility they may not get as much as the Concorde pilots got back in the day. But the examples Kevin was giving us yesterday, the planes are much, much, much safer.
Yeah.
So
it's not that pilots have gotten safer, it's that the planes have gotten safer. Everything around them, the systems, the workflows and things like that.
we value very much pilots, by the way.
We do, absolutely. Yes. So, Andy, I think when we ended up with that statement, there was a lot of back and forth in the room. We were probably in looking at high, middle, and low income countries. So, it was hard to make comparisons. But I think in the end, we ended up, in a good space.
Very much so. I hope the group will come across as very supportive of the concept of, right professional for right job at the right time. The discussion was a little nuanced because some jurisdictions don't have the luxury of choosing which type of professional or provider to do a task. And so there was concern that if we come out strongly in favor of task shifting, that will be misinterpreted and used by policymakers to drive an unhelpful narrative. And so, and there is evidence that inappropriate task shifting is actually worse than no care at all.
Yeah.
And I think that was some concern. I think we managed to wordsmith the final statement to get to a point where where the sentiment is conveyed without too much hazard.
And I think we got around a lot of the training piece was a big piece of it.
And not me and not the usual suspects, but there were some extremely well-informed individuals.
Oh, wow.
Yes. The folks we had in the room yesterday have literally written most of the literature in that space. And that's a good example of how about half the people had been to a POQI, half hadn't, and that's fairly typical for us. There are sort of jacks of all trade, masters of none, people like us who turn up and try and help with the process and the logistics. But then we have very deep content matter experts as well. And yesterday was a very good example of that.
It was. Anything else, I know we got to wrap it up and get going. Anything else that stood out for you yesterday as a highlight of your day?
No, as always, it's such good fun to see, people together. It illustrates the importance of collecting together physically in the same room, in the same space. As opposed to trying to do everything virtually. One of the good things, if there is a good thing that came from the pandemic, is that we have learned how to use online communication platforms, and they developed accordingly to allow us to do that. But I still think there's value in assembling together, and yes, Tim is a good example. So now, if those POQI group chairs are listening, it's time to write your sections up and send them in.
Andy, quick reminder of the pipeline, because there's a lot in it now. So right heart POQI.
So right heart POQI is the first one. The first paper of 4 is published and available. That's in Perioperative. And the other one is accepted, another one's in review, and the 4th is in review too. That's 9. 10 is the role of the gut in multiple failure and systemic inflammation, and that manuscript is finished and about to be submitted. 11 was a return to best practices of fluid, blood pressure, and goal-directed therapy. That's all of those papers are written actually under review. 12 we talked about, I think. 13 was Charlotte. 14 was another collaborative project with the Enhanced Recovery After Cardiac Surgery. That was to look at temporary mechanical circulatory support in the context of cardiogenic shock.
Yeah.
With an slight emphasis on the post-operative situation. Those papers are currently in preparation.
I was lucky enough to be in the room for that one.
I was going to ask how that went.
So that was one of the ones where industry listens but doesn't speak.
Yes.
And wow, I learnt a lot. So I realised how fast that field has moved and how little I know about.
Yeah, and I think there's a lot of people in that space. Mechanical circulatory support is changing from a very niche, very boutique, last kind of hurrah treatment to becoming much more widely available. The technology advances literally by the week. It's getting smaller and smaller, increasingly easy to use with an increasingly broad array of opportunity to use it. And I think that train is just about getting ready to leave the station.
The one that got me very excited, apart from the left-sided support, is I think back to some of the tragedies in COVID, which was a lot of... And we now can looking back is easy. The data suggests that the overwhelming number of deaths of the younger people was associated with right heart failure.
Yeah, and that was one of the reasons. Exactly. Well, that technology does exist now, and that one of the interesting things about that particular piece of technology is that it's not likely in the future to be a cardiac surgically deployed solution. Yeah. It'll be deployed by intensive care because it's essentially like putting a...
What technology are we...
We're talking about right heart microaxial flow pump assist, which exists in 2 formats, sort of a semi-rigid and a flexible format. And but the ability to place it, if you can put a central line in, you can put this thing in.
Yeah.
And
so a little bit bigger than a Swan-Ganz introducer, what some people call a cordis.
Yeah, about the size. Exactly.
Goes into the right heart.
Right, and provides mechanical right-sided circulatory assist. And
hit the button.
Exactly. And I think that is very exciting.
Yeah.
So that's one aspect of temporary circulatory support, and I think in the next at least 5 to 10 years, you're going to see that entire space explode.
Oh man,
very exciting.
Yeah,
I think.
Cool.
And I cut you off because that was that was at the end of the story.
So again, those 3 papers are being written.
Yeah.
One is on phenotypes, one is on algorithms, and I forget what the third paper from that particular sequence is, but they're currently being prepared. Each group had an opportunity to do that, and they will go to the surgical literature later this year.
Oh man, lots of good stuff. Anything up and coming that you're excited about?
Yeah, we're doing a POQI on nutrition in the summer in Southampton in England, immediately prior to the EPOM Congress. And there's interest in looking into pediatrics. Because children are not just small adults.
They're not.
And so there's an interest in looking into pediatrics, and we'll probably try and do that sometime next year. Our colleague Mike Grocott, who obviously is well known to this audience, is very keen to do a POQI on artificial intelligence.
Oh my God!
Good, because artificial intelligence is no. Wow, so it's funny you mentioned that. One of the things that we'll probably do actually is exactly that. We will undergo our normal POQI process, but we probably will, because there'll be many people with deep content expertise in that space, and say, have at it, Gemini, have at it, ChatGPT, or whatever your favorite, many AI platforms, and tell them to do it and see if we end up in the same spot.
Oh man, that'll be, we should do that before we get there.
Right. So that we continue to be busy, we continue to remain hopefully relevant people. But I have to say, if any of your listeners do have ideas that they think would benefit from that sort of process, shorta8@ccf.org, and I'm happy to receive any and all input. And if you think what we're doing is a waste of time, tell us. If you think what we're doing is good, tell your friends.
We'll put all that in the show notes. I think that's great. Yeah, to be able to connect us. And it's the POQI, POQI.
POQI.org.
Yes, perfect. Andy, always such a pleasure to sit down.
Thank you very much. It's been a great chat.
Anything at last that we didn't cover that we wanted to talk about today?
I don't think so. I mean, I always enjoy coming, periodically to sit on the
sofa and hang out.
And hang out, exactly.
See what's up and coming.
You mentioned it earlier, just not too much detail, Andy. I think you're working towards a sort of world direction.
Yes, that's what I wanted to say.
Thank you. So, much like the World Federation, there's a perceived need for a similar sort of organization in the cardiac anesthesia and cardiac perioperative care world. Mm-hmm. So we are literally here in Singapore to incorporate a new organization called the International Academy of Cardiac Anaesthesiology.
Oh, nice.
And this will be a society of societies, so people will join via their local jurisdiction as Cardiac Anesthesia Society with the goals of collaboration, research and education opportunities, surveys, that sort of thing, and hopefully, practice advisory guidance type documents. Yeah. And so that's very exciting. So I'm literally off to speak to a lawyer in a minute to incorporate that entity. Based in Singapore for all the usual reasons.
Yes.
Non-controversial, highly organized. The management company we've selected to run it are based here. And, literally where the East meets the West. All the usual historical reasons to be in Singapore. So very exciting.
We'll keep an eye out for it whenever we'll maybe have a conversation with you.
Next time around, we can talk about that in a little more detail.
And do you think you'll hang out in your own space, or we'll see you next time in Marrakesh, for example?
Who knows? Okay. Who knows? Wherever there's a TopMedTalks sofa, happy to have a cup of coffee.
Your new entity. Where might we see you in person?
Maybe if we get this right, we might have a booth at the SCA/AATS meeting in Toronto coming up in late April this year. That might be a bit of a stretch, but we might try.
Good.
We might be able to help you with that.
Yeah.
That would be good.
TopMedTalk being...
Yeah, that would be fantastic. Yeah. All four of the founders, myself, Alex McNair, Fabio Guaracino, and Chirajit Mukherjee will be there. So we should, if we can set that up, that would be really cool.
All right. Well, that sounds good. On that note, Andy, thank you so much.
My pleasure. Thank you very much for the opportunity.
Yeah, and cheers. Thanks so much for listening to TopMedTalk. You can find us on your favorite social media platform, LinkedIn, Twitter, Facebook. We're there. TopMedTalk.com. Be sure to check out our website. And lastly, YouTube. Man, Monty, we actually are going gangbusters there, aren't we?
YouTube, because we usually track our metrics by using the usual places and not YouTube.
True podcast.
We started to look more closely at YouTube, and our biggest, most listened to and watched, you could say, podcast last year was on YouTube, and that was Desiree.
Bern Sogel talking to us about Detect, and it was over 35,000 views.
Yeah.
So
he is a very good person to choose to listen to. Every time I talk to Bern, I learn something new.
Absolutely.
I've never met someone with such a deep appreciation of the, especially the blood pressure hemodynamic literature.
And he is
truly encyclopedic.
He is, and he is. I mean, passionate is maybe the wrong word because when you talk to him, but he is, and he's such a wonderful person and loves to share.
Talented investigator too.
He loves to share information whenever he can. So thank you to Bern, and thank you for listening wherever you are listening from. We appreciate it. That keeps us going. And thank you to our sponsors. We couldn't do it without you. All right. Cheers, everybody. Have a great day.
TopMedTalk.
Thanks for downloading TopMedTalk. Don't forget to subscribe via your podcatcher. Don't forget to check us out on social media. We're on Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn, and YouTube. And also, don't forget, TopMedTalk is the broadcasting arm of EBPOM, Evidence-Based Perioperative Medicine. We'd love you to find out more about that. If you check out ebpom.org, you can find low prices on some of the conferences we're organising around the world. Many of them are virtual and don't even involve you leaving your own home. Check out ebpom.org now.